On December 8th, 1980, late into the night in Manhattan, something is about to happen that will send shockwaves through the whole world, where either someone's father, mother, brother, or sister will be affected. John Lennon's life will be taken from him. There's no whispers of who, there's no mystery, there's no understanding, there's just pure sadness of how an icon is taken away in just a moment. This is the devastating death of John Lennon.
He was dead at the time of his arrival.
Inexplicable slaying of Lennon late this evening in front of his apartment building in New York City.
When a man emerged and fired 7 times.
Beatle John Lennon is dead. Where were you when John Lennon, when you got the word?
When you look at the last 5 years of John's life, they're peaceful and full of beauty. He's not been focused on playing music and writing new albums. John's main focus has been being a father and a husband. John's last years are also spent traveling for pleasure and back and forth to Tokyo to visit Yoko's family. And John has been granted a green card that now allows him to live in the United States and travel back and forth to where he wants. John sets up his base, his new home, in New York City, where he immerses himself into the culture, and even some might say, inspiring New York culture at the time. John lives in the Dakota Building on 72nd Street in Central Park West, towards the end of his life. John says he loves New York because he's a local. He can just be one with the people, living around the artists, the musicians, the normal, the famous. Everyone's one, just trying to live their day-to-day life and raise their family. John says he's absolutely in love with how New York is set up and being a part of it. But in 1980, December of that year, there's a man that's hanging around New York and trying to meet John Lennon. The man's name is Mark David Chapman. Chapman is a crazed fan about the Beatles and has always had an attraction to John Lennon. But the years leading up to this one point in December of 1980, there's telltale signs of who and why Chapman became who he did. In 1977, Chapman moved to Hawaii, where he attempted suicide and was taken to a hospital for evaluation, but later released. Later in his life, in 1979, he married, even marrying a person as the same race as Yoko Ono, just like John married. As Chapman tried to have a normal life, having a stable job, paying bills, being social, everyday normal things a person does, he also began to fall apart mentally inside, and his obsession with John Lennon grew from there. Chapman had made his mind up to kill John Lennon around August of that same year of 1980. To make a long story short of how Chapman got to this proposal in his head, why he says he made up his mind to take John Lennon's life, came from a book called Catcher in the Rye. Chapman said that he was also obsessed with the album and song Imagine, but was also upset with it. But from Chapman's own mouth, he says he thought he would take on the fame of John Lennon and be just as well known as John if he took his life. Chapman also talks about before the murder and after the murder of just being a no one, just a shadow in the background that no one knew was there. This troubled Chapman. He wanted recognition, he wanted fame, but was also dealing with a very unhealthy obsession with John Lennon. And with the two elements festering in his mind, they merged into one. Chapman said no matter what, if it wasn't on December 8th, he knew he would eventually come back to shoot John Lennon the 10th, 11th, even the next year. No matter what, he was going to do it. The chain of events that started to take place with Chapman would start on October 27th of that year, when Chapman would buy the .38 caliber revolver in Honolulu in his home of Hawaii. He paid $169 for the gun and toyed with it for days, figuring out how to use it. He first flew to New York City on October 29th to see if he could find Lennon and simply learn where he lived and where he went. After time in the city, Chapman decided just to fly home after not having much luck of finding John. He also said that he called his wife and told her that he was planning on killing John Lennon, and she talked him out of it. When Chapman finally found himself in his own bed again in Hawaii, he said the overwhelming thought of killing John Lennon rushed through his body. He made the decision to fly back to New York City. He got on a plane and arrived on December 6th of 1980. Chapman got the gun through airport security by placing it in his luggage, mixed around with his clothes. On December 7th, Chapman is looking around the area again, outside the Dakota, and in that same day, he runs into one of John's neighbors. That neighbor is James Taylor. When Taylor talks about the situation, he says he doesn't know when Chapman started to follow him, but he first saw him when he was stepping off the subway. Chapman, looking disheveled and sweating profusely, walks up to Taylor and starts rambling, and in the rambling, mentions things about John and that he needs to show John Lennon something. Taylor can tell that Chapman is out of his mind and sees red flags, but after some conversation, Taylor politely breaks away and says goodbye and walks away, not knowing that he just talked to the man that in less than 24 hours will shoot John Lennon. But Taylor's story will continue. When we do catch up with John that week in December, John's home, he's busy. He's promoting his new album, Double Fantasy, that just came out a couple months ago. He's happy, he's excited, and he's slowly getting back on top at a fast rate. But on December 8th, John's last day alive. John's last day is special. He does so many things in his last day alive, things that are special for him and for us as fans. He gives his last interview talking of his love for his life, his wife, his children, and his career that he's happy with. It's special because December the 8th really should have never happened for John. Chapman tried to take John's life the day before, but was not able. And that's what makes December 8th so special. Even more sad, but special in a weird way. It's because John shouldn't even been alive, but this is the extra day we were given with him. Starting with John's last day, this is a timestamp of what will happen moment by moment. John will wake up that morning around 7:30, make himself some tea, walk out to his patio, reading the newspaper, looking over Manhattan and seeing that Double Fantasy is moving up the charts and looking over his very busy day. But John is happy, he's satisfied. Yoko later wakes up to walk out and see John looking over Manhattan, sitting there peacefully. At this point, around 9:30, John and Yoko have breakfast at a little diner down the street. At 11, John and Yoko ride back home at the Dakota. John will take his last pictures that will later be published in Rolling Stone. The pictures that are taken are the last pictures ever captured of John and Yoko together, showing their love, their happiness, and also, these are the last pictures ever taken of John. At 1 p.m., John does his last interview. When the interview is done, John and Yoko get ready and head downstairs to leave. As they find themselves down at the bottom of the Dakota, trying to leave, John signs autographs to where he grabs a copy of Double Fantasy and signs John. But John doesn't know that he just signed his name for the man that is trying to kill him. Chapman had been waiting for John all day, and finally, he's down standing next to John Lennon with a gun in his pocket. Chapman says he considers shooting John right there, but there's too many people, and Chapman is somewhat struck that he's looking at John Lennon, and John is simply being nice and courteous to Chapman. With that, John and Yoko head to the studio for the last time, and Chapman waits. It's after 10:30 that night, outside the Dakota. Chapman's been there waiting and talking to the doorman, asking questions about John. John is coming back home so he can see his son and put him to bed. And with that, John and Yoko pull up in their limo. There just happens to be a vehicle parked in front of the entrance of the Dakota, from allowing John to simply leave the limo and head straight into the Dakota. So John's limo stops outside the building's gateway. Yoko steps out first, and then John, carrying a tape recorder and cassettes, walks right past Chapman. As John passes through the gate, Chapman steps out, puts himself in a combat-style position, and pulls out the gun. He points at John and fires. The first two hit John in the back, spinning him around. Two more hit him in the shoulder, and the fifth misses. Each bullet passes through John's body, slamming into a wood and glass windbreak behind him. Chapman does not go to John, he just looks as John stumbles up a few stairs into the building's office, mumbling with a weak voice, "I'm shot." Before falling face down, the Nightman Jay sees John stumble into his office and hits the alarm right under his desk. Police are summoned. Yoko rushes to grab John, screaming for a doctor. Outside, Chapman takes off his coat so police will see he's not armed and begins looking through a copy of Catcher in the Rye. Police show up within 2 minutes. They're right around the corner. Chapman is arrested. The police look at John and realizing he's lost an enormous amount of blood. Police pick up John's limp body and place him in the back of their car. Around 11:01, he's in the emergency room. John has lost more than 80% of his blood and has almost no pulse. Doctors make an emergency incision on the left side of John's chest and separate the ribs. When they do this, they find a very large amount of blood sitting in John's chest. Doctors look for injury to the heart or to the blood vessels, but what they saw was that all the major blood vessels leaving John's heart were destroyed. The doctor working on John literally holds John's heart in his hand, massaging it, manually pumping it, but every time he pumps it, most of what is pumped comes straight back out the holes of John's heart. John's heart was simply destroyed. 7 different medics desperately try to revive John's heart, but John is finally pronounced dead late into the night. The official cause of death is loss of blood and John's heart going into shock by massive hemorrhaging. The world is learning within minutes that John Lennon is dead, and the world is simply not okay with it. They are mad, they are furious, they are sad, and now they're learning the name of the man that took John's life. Chapman is taken to the police station and simply just starts talking about why he did it, obviously looking for fame and fortune, but he'll be greeted with the complete opposite, from people hating him and despising him. James Taylor was sitting right next to his window, with it cracked at the moment John was shot. Hearing 5 shots, he simply thought the police were shooting at someone, not knowing that his friend John Lennon was just shot to death. People in New York gather around the Dakota. People fly in from all around the world to also pay respects to John, and the Dakota becomes a tomb. Mark David Chapman is still in jail to this day, and every few years comes up for parole, with Yoko writing and pleading with the parole board to please not let Chapman out. It's sad for fans that this had to happen. It's even sadder when knowing that there was a person that loved John deeply, and now she's a widow. John had a son that he was raising, and the son will never be able to see his father again. There's no doubt that John changed the world with his art. He was purely a gift for the world. There's things in this world that we'll just never understand why they had to happen. Where a situation makes you so sad, your brain cannot understand it or process it. Sometimes it's scary to love something so much to where it's taken away from you. We lost John Lennon at his age of 40 in 1980. We still have his love of his art, and we'll always have it forever. In loving memory of John Lennon, who we all miss desperately.
And I consider that my work won't be finished until I'm dead and buried, and I hope that's a long, long time.